Well, my dear children, yesterday we have discussed that how a brilliant and intelligent scientist like Griffin turned to be a criminal due to his criminal bent of mind. We have read at least 5 paragraphs. So the portion for the coming examination is the present chapter, that is footprint without foot, that is I am teaching you. So there he was, after setting the house on fire, he slipped into a big store in the London. He there escaped without being seen. He wanted to escape without seeing. When he entered into the theatrical store, a theatrical store where he entered, he disguised himself in a very peculiar way. He bandaged his forehead, takes a colorful glass, take a false nose and a book whiskers, the mustache. So he wanted to escape unnoticed, but it could not be possible. It could not be possible. So he took the train to the village to Lupin, where he took the room at the local. He wanted to run away from London. Then he takes a train that could take him to the village. In the village, the arrival of the stranger on inn. Who was that stranger? You see how Griffin himself invites the trouble. The reason was his attitude. The reason was his bent of mind. As a scientist, I agree that he was a brilliant scientist. But it was his own inherent flaw. It was his inherent weakness. The personality that he possessed, it was due to his criminal bent of mind. It was due to his criminal bent of mind that he became a lawless person. And the trouble, the suffering that he came across was due to his own bent of mind. He himself dug his grave. See, what is the reason? Why he has burnt the house? There was no reason. Just to revenge? But just because the landlord was asking for rent? What is that? These are not sufficient reason to become a lawless person. He misused his scientific inventions. He misused his scientific inventions. And look at the trouble that he had in mind. His own bent of mind become the noose of his own neck. How it will become the noose of his own neck? You see, the arrival of the stranger, to escape from the London, he takes the train to village and he takes the shelter in an inn. An inn is a public place. He takes a shelter in the inn. His taking the shelter in the inn was a cause of concern for the villagers, as the stranger was very peculiar. a stranger, was peculiar. Why? Due to the theatrical costume that he has put on. The theatrical costume, the false nose, the colorful glass, the big hat, and forehead binding, it was a peculiar. So, the peculiar look of the stranger, uncommon appearance. What was his uncommon appearance? We have discussed it. You can see peculiar nose, big moustache, colorful glasses, and bandage on his forehead. This was the peculiar look. Peculiar look, bandage on his head, bandage on his forehead. Colorful glass, moustache. So these peculiar, uncommon appearance, his uncommon appearance was the cause of his popularity. The villagers were surprised at his uncommon look and the tongue, the language that he was using. A stranger of common connotation set all tongues wagging. Mr. Hall, Mrs. Hall, the landlord, the landlady, the landlord's wife, you may call the landlady, made every effort to be friendly. Mrs. Hall, the wife of landlord, or you may call the landlady, tried to be befriended. But Giffen had no desire to talk to. Giffen did not want to talk to that lady. Why? Because he wants to hide his identity. As he was a criminal now, he has committed 3 crimes. Set the house on the fire, steals the clothes from the stores, and the 3rd crime that he has committed, that he has taken costumes from the theater and pushed by knocking down the storekeeper, taken the money. So these 3 crimes has made him a criminal, has made him a lawless person. So, my reason for coming to leaving the village is a desire for solitude. What reasons he puts? He said that he came here for a solitude, for loneliness. He wanted to live alone. What a beautiful reason he has given. I don't wish to be disturbed in my work. And as I came here for loneliness, and I don't want to be disturbed. To whom he said these words? These words are said to Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Hall. These words are said to Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Halls, the wife of landlord, you may call landlady, Mrs. Hall. So he don't what? Decide An ancient has affected my face. What is the excuse? He gave an excuse that his face is looking typical due to an accident. Here you see the lame excuse, the false he was telling, the white lie that he was telling. Satisfied that her guest was eccentric scientist. Who was satisfied? Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Hall was satisfied that his guest, who was his guest? Who was her guest? It was Mr. Griffin. Mr. Griffin. Mr. Griffin was his guest. But she satisfied that his guest is an eccentric scientist. And in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance. Griffin has paid Mrs. Hall in advance. Paid in advance. The money that he has stolen from the storehouse and the theater, he paid that money to Mrs. Hall. Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable. He was quite irritating. Why he was quite irritating? He was irritating because Griffin was a man of a bad temper. Just in the above passage, we have read that he don't want to be disturbed. He wants solitude. He wants loneliness. And for that reason, he don't want to be disturbed. Actually, he wants to hide his identity. He don't want to disclose that he is some sort of a different person because he has already committed 3 crimes. So, but the stolen money did not go. The money that he had stolen from the storehouse, from the theatre, could not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He had no more cash now. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. So he pretended that a check is going to arrive. Another lie is told by him. To whom he tells this lie? To satisfy Mrs. Halls. When the money was over, she gave that, I am going to get money very soon, so I will pay your rent when I will get the money. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by the noise in the study. Here another crime is going to commit. He has decided to rob the clergyman. See the pity. See his criminal bent of mind. Alas, he could not have turned into a lawless person. His invention might be very useful for him. Dear children, any scientific inventions aims at for the betterment of the man. Griffith, the scientist, was brilliant. He was intelligent. You may call him gifted. But see, he used his gift of God, the reason, the science, for not for construction, for the destructive methods. You can recall the invention of Captain Ramsey. Scientific inventions should not be misused. So, creeping down, they had clinked the money being taken from the clergyman's desk. And he has taken the money from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise, with a poker gadget, he suddenly slipped away. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife locked under the desk, and behind the curtain and even the chimney there was not a sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been opened and housekeeping money was missing. The clergyman and his wife were surrendered. They don't surrender. Extraordinary affair. Why it was called an extraordinary affair? It was called an extraordinary affair because the room that appeared to be empty, there he and his wife, the clergyman and his wife, has locked himself behind the curtain and even up the chimney. So the room was quite empty. It was an extraordinary scene. The house owner has hidden himself and the room was empty. So he get ample opportunity to steal the money. But it was not extraordinary as a behavior of Mr. Hall's furniture little later the morning. But next morning Mrs. Hall's attitude was different. The landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Mrs. Hall and her husband wake up suddenly and they saw the room wide open. Usually it was shut and locked. And he was furious if anybody entered his room. Who was furious? Griffin became angry if anybody dares to enter. The opportunity to seem too good to miss. They peeped round the door and saw nobody and decided to investigate. Who are they? The landlord and Mrs. Hall. Why they decided to investigate? They decided to investigate because the Griffin room was lit open and nobody was there in that room. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been used for some time. And a stranger issue, the clothes, the bandage that always were lying about. The clothes that he has taken from the theatrical shop was lying over there. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the head paws leaped up and dashed itself into her face. Suddenly, the head and the nose that dashed her face. Surprising into the air, it charred the stranger to live. As she and her husband turned away in the terror, the extraordinary cheer pushed them both. So the invisible man was playing the trick. The man was there, but as Griffin was invisible, look at the trick that he was playing with Mrs. Hall and her husband. Mrs. almost fell down the stairs in hysteria. Why? When she collided with the chair, both out of the room and appeared to slam locked on the door after. She was convinced that the room was haunted by a spirit, haunted by a ghost, haunted by the spirit, and that the stranger had someone caused is entered into blissful nature. Somebody, the feeling among the neighbors was the trouble was caused by witchcraft. And the neighborhood, there was a feeling that there might be some spiritual element that they have disturbed. That they have disturbed. So, dear children, so far as the story that we have read, we came to the conclusion that it was due to the criminal bent of mind that that the brilliant, gifted, intelligent scientist Griffin become a lawless person. He became a lawless person. So, dear children, you should realize that if God has gifted you something, if God has granted something on you, you should be very much positive to your life. By the positive attitude of your life, you may become a very, very successful. Never take the way of a wrong path. Whoever takes the wrong path will never succeed. Remember, the slayer of today shall be slain tomorrow. The wages of sin is always death. The wages of sin is always